Well, hello everybody, both here today and if you are watching the recording. My name is Ainsley Newson. I work at the University of Sydney with a group called Sydney Health Ethics. And I also work with Australian Genomics, and we thank Australian Genomics for their help and support today to get to run this seminar. I'd also like to thank Kitty Jean Laginha, who's here on the call, for her help in organising today and interacting with our three invited guests. So this is our third seminar in a series designed to be of interest to people working on ELSI, or ethical, legal and social aspects. But before we get into things, I will start by acknowledging that we are coming together virtually, but if we are in Australia and also many places globally, we are on unceded Aboriginal land. And I would like to acknowledge that. For me, it is the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us today, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. So today's session has come about from a meeting of a steering group for this network. It's the Australian ELSI Genomics Network, which has been formed as an activity with the support of Australian Genomics. And it's a come if you're interested network, no prerequisites apply. And a few people popped their hand up earlier this year to be part of a group to help advise on what the network should do and what type of events we should hold. And so we've held two events so far. They were both great, really successful, and they involved a more formal seminar structure involving a couple of talks and a Q&A. But what we also thought might be nice, and also a really nice way to round out the year, given that all of us are very likely pretty exhausted by now and looking forward to a bit of a break, is to hear about what it's like to actually be a scholar in this space, to hear about some of the things that are really excellent about what we get to do, or if you're interested in coming into this space in the future, what it might be like, and also to hear about some of the challenges that might arise and how we overcome them. This is designed to be really interactive, apart from me having spoken flat for the first 5 minutes. But we've got 3 speakers and I'll be chairing, but please do use the raised hand function. There's enough of you on the call that I'm not going to be able to see you all on one screen. So please do use the raise hand function, or you can type a question into the chat. I mentioned earlier, we are recording this session. So if you would like me to pause the recording at any time, if you wanted to speak about an experience that you didn't want to have captured, please do feel free to private message myself or Kitty to do that. And also you can ask a question via chat and we can ask it on your behalf as well. So without further ado, I will say hello to our 3 panellists. We have, in the order they appear on my screen, Dr Danya Vears, Dr Erin Turbitt, and Dr Lisa Dive. And Danya, Erin and Lisa are all fantastic human beings and very nice people, but also ELSI scholars who would broadly fit the definition of being an early mid-career scholar, and also coming at questions in this space from different angles. So I might get each of you just to A, say just a tiny bit about yourselves, and B, if there's just kind of, we'll start actually where we're going to end as well. So just give me kind of one key thing you want to make sure you get across today, and then we can get those out of the way so there's no stress and we can come back to them as we go through. Does that sound okay? Great. So Danya, I'll invite you just to say hi first.
Hi first. So my name is Danya Vears. I never really know how to describe myself, and this is, I guess, one thing I was reflecting on today, but I guess I'm broadly a social scientist who works a lot around the ELSI genomics space. I currently work for the Murdoch Children's Research Institute as a senior research fellow and team leader. And I guess one thing I would like you all to get away from today is the importance of networking and meeting people, because I think that's really how I've gotten to where I am today, is putting myself out there and meeting other scholars.
Yeah, I 100% would not be sitting here today had I not gone to a seminar in 1997 and my mum not kind of gently nudged me in the back and said, go talk to that person over there. And that person was Julian Savulescu. So, and that completely changed the course of my life. So it's, you know, those chance encounters can be really important, as can networking. Thanks, Danya. Erin, you're next on my screen. Would you like to say hi and get your top tip or your top key take home point?
Sure. Thanks, Ainsley. So I'm Erin Turbitt. I'm a senior lecturer at University of Technology, Sydney, in the discipline of genetic counselling. So my role includes both teaching and research. So I'm a balanced academic. So I do about 2 days a week in this ELSI research space, I guess. And similar to Danya, I probably broadly describe myself as a social scientist, but have at various times in my career had various sort of crises about how to identify myself. Key take home, well, Danya probably stole my one, so I'm trying to think of a second key take home message that I have, but I guess a related issue or point to get across is about nurturing those relationships and really appreciating the role that mentors play, whether they're mentors that are more senior people or peer mentors, or even people that you might see as your mentees, who might, at various times, all of these different people across your career, you never really know where you might be calling favours on them, or they might come to you with favours. So I guess just nurturing those relationships is probably something I find really important.
Great, thanks, Erin. So networking, building and nurturing relationships. Thank you so much. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself and say just one of your key points that you want to get across today?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I work with Erin. I work at UTS in the genetic counselling discipline, and like Erin, I'm a balanced academic. I'm a lecturer there, so I do teaching in the genetic counselling program and also conduct bioethics research in focusing on genetics and genomics. I've got a different kind of a background again. So the way that I've taken to sort of describing myself is as a philosophically trained bioethicist, because my PhD was not in bioethics, it was in analytic philosophy quite a long time ago now. It's actually now 20 years since I finished that, but I haven't always done academic work since I finished that. So I've worked in health policy, came back to academic work to do a master's by research with Ainsley as one of my supervisors. So to Danya and Erin's point about networking and relationships, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't met Ainsley. And my take-home tip, I would say, reflecting on your own experience and training and what you bring to the ELSI space, which is a fundamentally interdisciplinary kind of space, is a really nice way of both learning from other people when you are working with people who have different kinds of disciplinary expertise. So like for me, for example, I'm learning as much as I can about the science, which is, I have no scientific background, but I'm really I'm trying to absorb as much as I can. And having just joined UTS full-time this year, I'm learning a lot about my counselling colleagues as well, which is really interesting sort of developmental opportunity for me, learning about things like the theory of reflective practice, which I'm really enjoying. And I can get something from that in my own work. And I also recognise that as a proper philosophically trained philosopher, I guess, that I bring something unique and different to the ELSI space compared to my colleagues, and to sort of feel comfortable with that difference in disciplinary background, I guess. Does that make sense? Yep. Cool.
Yes, I lost my mouse. Sorry, I couldn't get to the mute button. I need to learn the keyboard shortcuts. Thank you so much to all of you. Erin's just popped up her camera for a minute because she's just gone to get, she's back with some headphones. Hi, Erin. Thank you. So before we go on, what I might just do to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our audience today, I also thought before I go in with my pre-prepared questions, which the panelists, I should say Kitty and my pre-prepared questions, thanks Kitty. Before we go in to do those, I want to make sure we're meeting your needs. So if you as an attendee today have a question that you want to have answered, maybe now would be a good time to check in with that. So either just pop your hand up or pop it down into the chat, and we can have a look and see if we're going to answer those as we go. I'll just give everyone 1 or 2 seconds to just a bit to have a look and see if there's anything they want to ask us immediately.
While people are thinking, can I just check if you can hear me better now?
That's a lot better. Thank you,
Okay,
Erin.
great. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, Danya, great question. In the chat there, can we reflect on how we define ourselves? So I have a question that's kind of a bit like that, but possibly not in those exact words. And I might add a question on top of that, actually, which is, why is it important that we define ourselves? You can see that it could possibly, I mean, I think one thing to also say about this word ELSI, or ethical, legal and social issues, and it's usually applied mainly to genetics and genomics, but I think there is an ELSI in other fields too, like neuroscience, for example. We are quite interdisciplinary, even perhaps transdisciplinary. And so sometimes that can be great and sometimes that can be challenging. And I think we'll unpick that a little bit as we go through today. But so defining, where does it come in and how do we do it? So I might throw that open. Danya, because you asked the question, would you like to have a first crack at giving your thoughts on it?
Yeah, sure. I guess I've thought about this over the years, as I said, because I have trouble figuring out how to describe myself when people say, what do you do? And it really depends on who I'm talking to as to what I say. So for me, if I'm in a room full of genetic counsellors, even though I have a genetic counselling degree, a master's degree, and I'm qualified to be one, I never say I'm a genetic counsellor because I don't feel qualified to do that. But also, I guess I also try to target what is the thing that I bring that is different, which ties into, I think, what Lisa was saying. So if I'm in a room full of bioethicists, I'm not going to say I'm a bioethicist. I might say I'm a social scientist or an empirical researcher, because that's what I can maybe contribute that it's a bit different to. So that ties into your question, Ainsley, about why I think it's important. I think it's important to be able to describe to people what we bring to the situation and what our niche is.
Thank you. That's great. So you've provided a really nice rationale, but you've also provided an example of how you do that. And I think a really key point of what you just said then is that it doesn't have to be the same answer every time. You can, and it's not that you're being dishonest, you're shaping your expertise to fit the people that you're engaging with. So I think that's really key. Lisa or Erin, would either of you like to build on or add something to that question? Like, can we reflect on how we define ourselves and why is it important to do that?
I was just going to add, or as Danya was talking, thinking the fact that where this has been the most important for me is in either job or grant applications. And that's really where it's made me think very deeply about how I define myself and how my the papers that I've published or the research interests that I've focused on have led to the application that I'm working on at that time. And I guess no application is really the same. And at various times I've applied for jobs in within different disciplines of universities or applied to different funding schemes. So I guess in some ways there's a bit of an advantage and some flexibility to craft your identity in terms of what you're applying to. But as long as that's not at the risk of sort of not having a coherent story that you can make at the same time.
Erin, and that story is perhaps something that you can and want to craft, but it's also something that I guess we're necessarily asked to do. For example, Penny's got a question in the chat around how we should manage this need to fit ourselves into particular faculties. Before we jump in, and Lisa, I'll let you speak next. The other thing I just want to flag is I know that we've got people attending today who aren't in a university setting or perhaps aren't in a research institute setting either, and you're interested in maybe how ELSI research fits in what you do. So you might say, for example, work for a patient-led organisation or a non-government organisation. So I just want to make sure, or you might be a student or you might be thinking about this for your future. So I just wanted to flag that I see you and I know you're here, and that this conversation is intended to be applicable in the round. So don't just think that we're here only to talk about university departments or people who'll be applying for individual fellowships and things like that, because obviously we've got those kinds of folks here, but we've got others too. So yeah, so thank you for coming and showing your interest. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Oh, just to add to what Danya and Erin said, I completely agree that the way I would define myself varies according to the context, and also that it's really important to sort of create that story about what kind of a researcher you are. The little extra thing that I would add is that when you describe yourself as a certain kind of an academic, it might give people a clue, depending on, again, which kind of an audience you're talking to. It'll tell people how you're going to approach the issues. So like for me as a philosophically trained bioethicist, I feel like that includes the information. I'm not a clinician, I'm not a genetic counsellor, I have no medical training, and I'm not a scientist in that way, but I have a sort of an analytic philosophy kind of conceptual analysis approach to the complex ethical issues that are found in the ELSI space. So that I feel is a sort of a description that is helpful for me in that way. But then probably if I was in a philosophy department attending a philosophy course, I would say, oh, I'm a bioethicist who works way down the more practical and applied end of philosophy now. So yeah, it varies a bit.
Thank you. It's that thing of like, we all bring with us a kind of suitcase containing our methods and our presumptions and our conceptual kind of ideas. And sometimes we have to unpack it and show everybody what's inside. And sometimes people already know what's there and we don't need to do that. Sometimes we even need to maybe put some stuff back in. I don't know. I think I've pushed that metaphor about as far as I can go. So I'll move on. Stephanie White has asked a question in the chat around, and I think it's probably a nice one to kind of step back out and be a bit broader again, around how you chose or found your area of expertise within the ELSI space. So a little bit more of your narrative experience would be great. Danya, I'll come back to you if that's okay.
Sure. So I guess I found my space through not really trial and error, I guess, but when I was doing my master's degree in genetic counselling, I was really interested in being a genetic counsellor at the time. That's why I did the course. But as I went through the course, I started thinking, maybe I still want to do research. And then I sort of came out of it, and there weren't actually that many jobs at the time because this is like 12 years ago. And so I thought, well, I probably want to do a PhD. And I just reflected on the course and I thought, well, what was I most passionate about during the course? And it was all ethical issues around genetic testing. And so I had a tutor at the time during that course, which was Lynn Gillum, who was amazing. And she really inspired me because I thought she would really help me question practices. So I approached her and said, will you be my supervisor? And she thankfully said yes. And so that sort of set me on the trail to where I am now. So I never did bioethics as a subject in terms of my training, but I did that sort of more on the job, and just sort of was lucky enough to follow the things I was interested in. I was very fortunate to get offered a job rather than having to apply for a job when I was doing my PhD. And that involved moving to Belgium. So that's where I did my first postdoc. But that was all through networking that I got that opportunity, because I went over to a conference in Europe and met my future boss, as it turned out. So yeah, that's why I said that was my tip.
That's great. Come back to your key point as well. Excellent. I also met my postdoc supervisor at a conference. So again, it's probably not unique to the ELSI space, but now that we're sort of starting to get back to face-to-face meetings again, it's so great to be able to meet people in that way. Danya, something that really stuck out for me there was following your passions, but also I think your comment around the kind of apprenticeship or on-the-job learning of some of the methods and approaches and thinking that you now use. And I think that's really inherent to ELSI research. And it's not unique to ELSI research, but I think it is a really strong case in point in that you can't come out of your training with knowledge of philosophy, sociology, law, unless, you know, you've done a lot of degrees, or unless you, you know, did something as relatively superficially. And, you know, you certainly can't necessarily have all the scientific vernacular that you need as well. So I think there is absolutely nothing to be afraid of with on-the-job learning and noting in your skill set, you know, maybe what you might want, and then directing, you know, hooking yourself up with people who are experts in that particular thing and learning from them, or getting involved in projects. So I'm the same. I have never formally studied qualitative methods of obtaining empirical data, but I've spent maybe the last 6 to 7 years deeply involved in quite a lot of projects that involve that method, and I've watched and listened, and I'm by no means an expert, but I know a lot more about it than I did. And similar with deliberative public engagement methods like citizens' juries, I've just learned how to do it. I led one with really excellent mentorship, and that was extremely useful. Just on Steph's question though, sorry, I'm not a panelist today, so I should stop giving you all my own insights, but I'd just like to ask Lisa and Erin also to reflect on Steph's question. And Lisa, you're already unmuted, so I'll ask you first.
Okay, I'm just unmuted because I'm in a quiet room. Yeah, so I think it's a combination of finding what you're really passionately interested in and also casting about for opportunities. And it's a bit who you meet and who you have really interesting conversations with. For me, I was working in health policy and wanting to get back into academic work oriented towards bioethics, and I didn't quite know how to do it, which is how I ended up coming to do a Masters by Research with Ainsley and with Angus Dawson at Sydney Health Ethics. And in the process of doing that Masters research, I sort of was able to delve into the concepts that I found really interesting and do a research project that was quite philosophical and really interesting to me. But at the same time, by being in Sydney Health Ethics, there was a part-time postdoc role that came up on a NHMRC project about global biobank networking, and so that was an excellent opportunity for me to delve into a area of like a topic area that I wouldn't have really thought up myself. Also to learn qualitative research methods in that kind of on-the-job learning kind of way, and then also to get a sort of a sense of the kind of research that was going on in that data governance kind of space. So I would say a sort of a combination of looking for the opportunities that you might come across, as well as sort of picking up those opportunities or actively pursuing those that really grab your interest.
Cool, thank you, Lisa. Erin.
I'm not sure I have too much to add. I agree with everything that's been said. Although I guess and just coming back to Steph's question, I'm not sure I've really chosen my research area as a definitive thing that won't change in the future. So I think I have sort of tried to keep a focus around pediatric health research. Parental decision making is sort of my area, but that does change over time. And I think, yeah, similar to what others have said, it's really been a case of opportunities that have presented themselves, and also my key interests, and trying to keep that almost sort of linear thread for when I'm thinking about those applications that I talked about earlier, that you can weave some kind of similarity between the different projects that you've worked on. And I guess one interesting experience that I had was applying for a job when I was during my postdoc in the US, which was not a pediatric focused role, and the research was going to be in adult research. And I was a little bit ambivalent about whether I wanted the role, and the person hiring for the job was trying to convince me that I shouldn't be focusing on pediatric research because there's no money in it and I'd never get funded, and I should consider their line of research. Obviously, they're a bit biased, but did really make me take a step back and think also, I guess the other thing is to think about funding and sort of these external trends of where research is going, if that's something that, you know, if you're going to be applying for research funding and relying on that for your future, thinking about being a little bit strategic in that. I didn't take their advice, and I still work in pediatric research, and that's what really interests me and I think keeps me going. But I think it was, yeah, an interesting piece of advice that I took a while to reflect on and think about.
Thanks, Erin. And also, I guess what comes out for me and what you just said is sometimes it's okay to not take advice. Like it's okay. You can have a critical authority over yourself, even at a career stage where you might still be comparably junior. And that's okay. If you've got strength of what your interests are and your convictions, sometimes you can turn something down in order to keep exploring, although it can be leads to uncertainty and perhaps a bit of anxiety from that as well. There is also, thank you, there is also another question from Radistina in the chat. I think this is a great
Can I just
question.
comment on that
Oh,
for a
of
second?
course.
Sorry, I had my hand up.
I didn't see it, sorry.
It's okay. No, I just wanted to say I'm probably not very strategic when it comes to that kind of thing. So Erin, I probably should listen to you a little bit more. But one of the things about my area of research interest is it just keeps getting bigger and bigger because I keep collaborating with lots and lots of different people from different areas. And I think there's got to be a balance in that, and I haven't found it yet. But I think when you come out of your PhD and you do your first postdoc, you're in a very narrow area because you've just like researched one thing for 3.5 or 4 years, and then you start getting more opportunities and you start saying yes to things, and it is important to broaden your area of scope. But I think there's got to be some point where you go, okay, now I need to stop broadening and narrow in a little bit again. So if anyone has any tips about that, let me know.
Yeah, just from my perspective, it can take some time. I always had 2 tracks of interest around, one around ELSI genomics and reproduction, and the other one around clinical ethics support, actually, which is quite a general question. And then I just thought, why am I feeling so much dissonance all the time? And why am I always so spread? And so just slowly I pulled back from that thread, and I just felt that there were plenty of other excellent people already working there, and I needed to focus on one thing a bit more deeply. So that was what I did. But it wasn't an overnight decision. It took a good couple of years to slowly let things come to their natural conclusion, but I just didn't pick up anything else in that space. That would be my top tip. Stop saying yes to things if they're not front and center. So yeah, easier said than done, I know. So yeah, thank you, Danya, for that great extra point. So Radistina has a question which is really great in the chat, but I think I might leave it and come back to it, because the first thing I want to do actually is just ask each of you, what I would like to do before answering that question is actually just ask each of you to give me your thoughts about what you think kind of the ELSI space even is, like just to sort of, I guess, illustrate that it is still a nascent area of inquiry, even though it's been well funded in different places over the years. But whether we use the word discipline or field or something else, like what even is this sandbox that we're playing in here? I will let the first person with a good idea who wants to say something to reply to that. It's very challenging, isn't it?
I'm not sure I have the answer, and I might have another question around that, because I'm not sure it's specifically something I identify as in terms of an ELSI researcher. And part of my hesitation has been that I don't fit into all letters of the acronym. So I don't really do ethics research, although my research has sort of ethical implications. I'm not a legal expert at all, and probably the S is what I identify with the most, but I'm not trained as a sociologist. So sometimes I feel a bit uncomfortable about the acronym and don't always, it's not necessarily something that I've identified with myself. I haven't answered the question at all.
No, that's okay. I think what you're showing though is that there is perhaps hesitation around what even identifying with the question means, and who can or should say that they are an ELSI scholar. I also think the term has really come much more from, say, North America, where I'd say people can say they're an ELSI scholar and others will know more immediately what they mean, rather than Australia. I should also add, I'm not necessarily advocating that we adopt this terminology front and centre in Australia. If anyone asks me what I do, I tend to say I'm a bioethics academic. But I also think for me, it's around asking these kinds of questions. So it's not necessarily saying I'm all of these things. It is, I ask questions that come at it from this particular angle. But Lisa, you unmuted, so I'll let you jump in as well.
Yeah, I've got just quite a different perspective to what Erin just said. First of all, I think of the S in ELSI as not sociology, but any kind of social implications of genomic technologies. And for me, the ELSI space is all the ethical, legal and social implications that arise from the sort of scientific medical enterprise of genetics and genomics. And so it's rich and diverse, and I feel like you don't have to be all of them. You can be just one. So for me, I identify with the E, obviously. And yes, the ethical issues in related to genetics and genomics have legal implications in some, or they sort of interface with the legal issues and this, obviously very strongly with the social issues. But I don't feel that you need to sort of hit all the points to be a researcher operating in that space, for sure.
Thank you, Lisa. Danya, do you have anything immediate that you want to say to build on those?
Just that I agree with Lisa. I've never really conceptualized ELSI as having to tick all the boxes. But I think one of the things that I reflect on a little bit was when I'm part of the sort of a steering group for the LPAG, which is for the European Society of Human Genetics. There's a stream that's called LPAG, which is the ethical, legal and psychosocial aspects of genetics. And we created that term because it was not quite ELSI, but it sort of evolved from a previous conference name, et cetera, et cetera. But we were very conscious to try and get the ethics and the legal and the psychosocial all in there together because they're so interconnected, and we wanted to make sure it was all inclusive. But I think, yeah, I've never really defined myself as an ELSI researcher in that term before. And I didn't think about ELSI genomics as a field until you just asked it. I guess I've just always thought about what I do as just like looking at ethics to do with genomics.
Yeah. And that's obviously totally okay. I think, this is an interesting question. I think it's bound around some stuff that we'll come on to around things like funding, publication, justifying our own existence to those that provide funding, I guess, and offer us positions in due course. So I think maybe Erin and Danya, you've sort of answered Radistina's question a little bit already. Her question is around at what point do you start defining yourself as an ELSI researcher? And, what is the difference, I guess, between sort of doing a couple of projects in this space and sort of being, front and center, having that identity. And I think what I'm hearing maybe is, Lisa, you sort of feel a bit more comfortable in that, even though you might not necessarily use the word ELSI. And then Erin and Danya, you're more like, well, this is what I work on. I haven't really gone so far as to immediately say, this is exactly what I do. I don't know, I might be putting words into your mouths there. But, I guess if you take on the identity that you take on, has that happened for you, whatever it might be? And how did you know that you had this identity? I should add, I still don't know that I do either. So I've been doing this for more than 20 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I probably still would say that I do some ELSI research, but don't necessarily identify as an ELSI scholar. Like when I submit a publication and you can check the ELSI keyword or subtopic or whatever, I might check that so it goes to the right reviewers. But that's not necessarily that I identify with that. But then when opportunities come along, like people ask you to be on a panel about ELSI, people working in ELSI, I'll say yes, and that might benefit me in that way. So yeah, depends on the circumstance, really.
Yeah, great, thank you. Lisa, you unmuted as well.
I don't know if it necessarily resonates as an identity per se. It feels a little bit American, and I think there are different terms in different jurisdictions, so I wouldn't say that that's what I am. But yeah, as a sort of a description for an area of research, I think ELSI is something that a lot of people will understand. And but yeah, I would probably more define myself as I do research on ethical aspects of genetics and genomics.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So another thing I wanted to ask about was what you all see, I guess, as a key challenge in your day-to-day work. And so that's kind of a negative. And then if we can sort of temper that negative, if there's something you have done or hope to do or are working on to try and mitigate that challenge? So yeah, what's something that I guess, yeah, you've struggled with a little bit, being a person in the field that you're in or the world that you're in, and what have you done or hope to do in order to get by it? Lisa, you're still big on my screen, so I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in because it's something that I have been reflecting on a bit, because I started a new job this year in May. I came to UTS after being at Sydney, working with you, Ainsley, on Mackenzie's mission. So for me, I guess it's a sort of a challenge in some ways that I'm a bit of a disciplinary fish out of water at UTS. I'm not in a philosophy department or even a bioethics department. And I don't work with anyone else who would really define themselves as a bioethicist, although Erin does a lot of really good ethics oriented kind of research. But for me, I think, as I said in my first top tip, I think in some ways that can be an opportunity to sort of enrich your research by really connecting with other areas of disciplinary expertise. And so, you know, like the counselling side of genetic counselling and all the psychosocial issues around genetics and genomics and the scientific aspects. But also something that I'm really conscious of doing to mitigate that challenge is actively pursuing ways of staying connected with my bioethics colleagues. So that's dropping into seminars at other institutions when they have bioethics seminars and journal clubs and things like that, and attending conferences and all that kind of thing, which I find enormously enriching. And then it sort of invigorates me and in terms of my research, and I feel like I bring a lot back to my role at UTS from having those connections and that sort of those close working relationships outside of my own institution.
Thanks, Lisa. And I know that's something, Danya, I've seen you do as well, because I see you at conferences that are distinct from each other. So yeah. Do either you, Danya, or you, Erin, have anything to add here on like a challenge and a mitigation strategy for doing the type of work that we do?
I'll talk to this. I don't necessarily know that this is distinct to the type of work we do. I think it's distinct to the fact that there are a lot of females in this call, which I'm going to raise this. I think there's obviously some issues in terms of like backing ourselves and having the confidence to go for things. And I just give an example that when I was living in Belgium and I really wanted to come back to Australia because my brother had just told me that he and his wife were pregnant, and I wanted to get a job back here. And I saw a job come up that was advertised, which is with Julian Savulescu and the Biomedical Ethics Research Group. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to even bother applying to that because I'm not a philosopher and that's what they're going to want. And so I thought, yeah, I'm not going to apply. And then I had a really good mentor and friend who said, just go for it. You know, you've got nothing to lose. And I ended up getting the job. And so I think that there's this issue of that, about feeling like we don't necessarily fit in certain boxes. We make assumptions about what people want us to be. And then you don't have the self-confidence to just go for things. Sometimes it's hard. But having good mentors and like cheerleaders around us, champions, is really important to help mitigate that.
That's great. Thank you, Danya. You were breaking up a tiny bit when you were speaking then. So I'm wondering if you can magically make your internet faster, but it might not be the case. So I think we did catch what you were saying. It was just a bit fast at times and then slowing down again, but we'll see how we go. Erin, did you have a challenge that you wanted to add?
I think it's quite similar to Danya's, and maybe not just being an ELSI scholar, but is probably a similar challenge to a lot of early and mid-career researchers, in that we sort of don't have a structured system of sort of mentorship and nurturing people at our level. And that's something I've particularly noticed when I compare myself with my colleagues in the US who are at similar career stages, who have entered a university space as what they call a junior faculty, and they're very incredibly well supported and mentored. They have a team around them that is designed to really advise them and help them think strategically about their career. It's very structured, and I'm sure there's still variation in that across roles in universities, but it's really nothing like that that we have in Australia. And I think that the challenge there has been for me to try and build that team myself, and then you're often tapping on people's shoulders who it's not part of their role to be your mentor. And they might not be at your institution, and these are people that are already overloaded, and you're asking them to sort of do this almost in their free time. So I think that's something that's been a challenge for me, and particularly apparent when I compare with systems in other places. And maybe there's advantages to that. You might have a bit more flexibility in who you choose as your mentors, and it can work to your advantage. But it's still something that I've found challenging.
Thanks, Erin. And it's maybe something we need to do better with. Okay, and it's an idea for the network as well, maybe.
Can I ask Erin a question?
Please do, Danya.
Sorry, I keep putting my hand up, but I'm not sure you can
I'm
see.
only seeing it when you start speaking. I don't know why. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask Erin how you find the right mentors for you, because I think that particularly when you're working in an interdisciplinary space, it can be really challenging to figure out who ticks the right boxes. So I'm wondering how you have worked with that.
Well, I think first and foremost, they're nice people. And in some ways, and they have the time for you. And in some ways, everything else is a little bit secondary. But I have a range of different mentors that I tap into for different reasons, I guess, and not just getting advice from one person. So I'm not sure I'm particularly strategic, more than just working with people that I like and enjoy working with.
And the only other thing I'd say about mentoring too is that sometimes, like, trying stuff on, it might fit and it doesn't, and there's no guilt or shame to be had if you explore a relationship and it isn't the right fit. You can sort of have a frank conversation about that. Or sometimes mentorship comes to a natural conclusion, in the sense that you have a particular thing you want to unpick, and you can do that and have a really great time, but it doesn't necessarily need to persist over years and years. So it's a thing that's really driven by the mentee, and so you kind of get out of it what you put in, really, and you can go into it with different questions, and it can be a short or long-term thing, and it can change if you don't think the fit is right. So yeah, I'm going to ask a follow-up question about challenges. I think what we've talked about is really rich, about standing up for ourselves, seeking mentorship, seeking the right kinds of mentorship, but also I think this is possibly me speaking from my own experience here, but you write a grant application, you put it in. If it's ARC, you get to see the reviews before a determination is made. And that classic thing happens for someone like me, for example, in that you've written it to kind of be a philosophical bioethics research project, and a person who's reviewed it is coming at it with a much more social science lens. And so you can see them kind of groaning at you through the page, in the sense of, why haven't you answered a question this way instead of that way? And your answer is kind of, well, because that's not how I tackle the questions. That's not what my methodology is all about. And I'm sure all of us, whether it be a report that we've written, or a paper, or a grant application, or a talk, we all get questions sometimes when we do talks on different things, where you can just see that person is coming at your answer, coming at what you've said or done from a completely different perspective than you. So I'm interested from our panelists, has this happened to you? And you don't have to give too much of the example if you don't want to, but and what have you done about it when it's happened?
Definitely happened to me. I had some very hardcore sociologists review a grant that I put in once, which and the grant was trying to be a bit more interdisciplinary, I guess, and draw on strengths from lots of different fields, but it wasn't enough of the social theory that they wanted to see in there. It was ARC, so I had the opportunity to respond, and it wasn't funded, but I think from that experience, all you can really do is think about crafting your application to be understood by a variety of audiences, and then that just goes along with getting a variety of people to look at your application before it goes in, and not just people in your discipline, but people outside the discipline as well. And it seems unfair that we should have to justify our methods in that way. There's lots of other fields where that wouldn't be a requirement, and it uses up precious space in an application. So hopefully there are some changes in the way grants are reviewed in the future, but I guess that's what we're stuck with for now. I'm not sure if others have more insightful ways that they can tackle this than that.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying, like whether it be a grant application or something else, is kind of understanding your audience, understanding who's going to see what you're saying and write it with them in your mind's eye. And like you say, sometimes you end up trying to please everybody, but please no one. Sometimes you do please people. Sometimes you don't please them and they fund you anyway, which is what happened to me. You could have knocked me over with a feather when that happened. So I think, but it's this idea of being interdisciplinary folks, understanding that what we do is both drawing on different ideas, but also is read and taken on by different people as well. And they may have no training at all in these methods or ideas, or they may have training in some, but not all of them. Yeah. Danya or Lisa? Oh, you've both unmuted. I saw Lisa first.
I can be quick. I was just going to say, I haven't had that experience with grants, but I've had it with reviews of papers for journals, where even if it's a bioethics oriented kind of journal, you might get someone from a different disciplinary background reviewing your paper, or even from a different jurisdiction where the healthcare system is fundamentally very differently structured. So I think it's a lot about setting up your topic, your paper, your research question, depending on the kind of thing that you are presenting, and just being really clear about why you're approaching it in a particular way. And like Erin said, maybe doing a little bit of that extra work and sort of setting it up at the outset.
Absolutely. I'm going to hold that thought because it leads nicely into the next thing I want to ask you about. But Danya, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just briefly, I was going to say about publications.
That's actually what we're going to talk about next. So yeah. Roll on, off you go.
So I guess I think I've learned how to target my journals a bit better than I was when I first started publishing. So I think about my audience in terms of who I want to read the work as my first point of call. But then I actually pick the journal before I even start writing the paper generally, because you're going to have to write different ways for different journals. And so I think that's really made me be more strategic about how I do it. So I don't have to go write a paper and then go, oh, actually, I want to publish it in a bioethics journal. I'm going to have to rewrite it. So that can sort of help. It can't help if you get reviewers that don't like your work because you can't have control over that. But even then, you can think, like, a lot of journals actually ask you to suggest reviewers. And so you can think about who are the people that might not have a conflict of interest, but also be most relevant to the work that you're going to be producing.
Thank you. I think that's all really sage advice. Yeah, it's great to think about where you're going to publish, and also just widening the conversation a little bit. If you're writing a submission to a government inquiry, for example, there's a couple in our world due in the next couple of weeks, is thinking about the public servant who might be reading that at the other end and what their knowledge is going to be and what you want to get across to them. So some great advice I got from a government expert here at the University of Sydney is always put a key point summary at the start, use dot points, use subheadings, write less rather than more when you're doing that type of thing, for example. And sometimes when you get referee reports that are negative, you can sort of push back a little bit, but also sometimes they can help you frame your paper a bit more strongly as well. So you can say, allow me to sort of reiterate the purpose or frame or something like that. So yeah. But yeah, so actually what we wanted to ask you was, whether you have a publication strategy. That makes it maybe sound slightly grander than we might otherwise frame it ourselves, but also just what influence the types of places that we work in have. So, you might be someone doing the type of work you do we've got two people here in a university setting, and we've got you, Danya, in a research institute setting with a cross appointment at a university. If you worked in an arts faculty, it might be slightly different. If you work in a law faculty, the expectations might be different about where and how you publish. And also it can filter down to things like whether you are lauded for writing papers by yourself, or whether you have papers with multiple authors, and even the convention of which position in the authorship is the most meaningful. Like in biomed world, the senior or the last author position is considered the sort of over the supervisory role, whereas in law it's considered as the person who did the least work. So sometimes though that can go in your favor, because in your world it can look great and then other people get what they want too. But it's very interesting to think about these kinds of strategies. So when you're thinking about your strategy for outputs of your research, whatever they may be, and thinking about that in relation to this question of the ethical, legal, social aspects of our research, and kind of us as a nascent group of people trying to carve out a space for ourselves, what goes into it for you?
Sure, I could continue a little bit more, because I think I've already started answering this question.
Yeah, no, that would be great.
So just a couple of things. Firstly, when I worked for the University of Melbourne, I was actually in the law department, and I didn't really fit very well there because my topic wasn't really in line with the law. But I guess the types of publications I write also didn't really align with the kinds of publications I were expecting. And that was quite hard, because there wasn't really anything I could do about it apart from change disciplines, which wasn't going to happen. But yeah, I definitely felt like the types of publications I was producing weren't as valuable to the law school as they would have been to other institutes. So now I feel like I'm a bit more at home, which is really nice. I think one of the things I think I struggle with a little bit is the fact that, especially with grant applications, the kinds of publications I write aren't going to be getting into those like tier 1 journals, because it's just not that kind of research. And so I think when you're competing with other people who have different science backgrounds, and you're in the same pool of, say, investigator grant applications, then it is quite hard to distinguish why what you do is as valuable as what other people do, even if you're not publishing those same journals.
Yeah, I 100% endorse every single thing you just said, including the trying to make your publications look amazing when you're up against people who have 6 papers in JAMA and 15,000 citations, for example. So Lisa and Erin, your publication strategy, what types of things inform, I guess, what you write and where you decide to put it? Both maybe academic papers, but other stuff too, if you've been involved in other activities.
I would say it would be guided, by the kind of work, and I would definitely recommend Danya's advice to choose a journal early. This is something that I find quite hard to do, but I think it's a really beneficial thing to do, really helpful. So if it's a project which I will always try and pull a bit towards the more philosophical journal, and I think if it's a very much a theoretical paper, I would try and pull more towards the theoretical end of bioethics-y kind of journals, because that feels like the appropriate place for my work in the world. But then likewise, I've been involved in big projects with significant empirical components, and so I guess it's where you want the findings of your research to, where it's most likely to reach the people who you want it to get to. But it's very much a discussion with co-authors situation most of the time, I think.
Absolutely. And just while we're talking about journals, I think something that's really interesting as well is we all have a sense of, you see the stuff that you like reading in certain places. So there's a handful of bioethics journals that I really like. Also, say in the genetics and genomics world, the European Journal of Human Genetics seems particularly amenable to the type of stuff that we all do. But the other thing that's really interesting is when you go to look at, because Danya mentioned tier 1 journals or first quartile journals. So all journals are ranked, and sometimes they're ranked on a mechanism that doesn't really make much sense. So like bioethics, for example, traditionally at least hasn't really been a citation-based discipline. Like the measure of a paper's quality isn't how many people cite it, it's, you know, where it's published, and I guess how other, you know, how well it's discussed if it ends up on a teaching syllabus or something like that. And there are various databases out there that purport to measure the quality of these journals. And then there's one in the Web of Science called the Medical Ethics. So there's a list of medical ethics journals, and it's got 16 journals on it. But I've never heard of some of them. And then other journals that I think of as super key in my field aren't even there. So they're off in some things that, you know, sometimes they end up in really odd places that you're like, that's not how I would categorize this journal at all. So sometimes where a journal is categorized is completely beyond our control. And then it can be harder for us to tell our story about things like field weighted citation indexes and things that we won't have time to get into today. But I think looking at where the stuff you like ends up is probably a really good measure of where to look for your publication strategy. Yeah. Erin, did you have anything you wanted to add on this question of papers or publications?
I guess the only thing to add to that is having a bit of experience now with the editorial side of publishing. Something I have been doing more often is recommend as many reviewers as I possibly can. So if the journal asks for 3 to 6 reviewers, I'll recommend 6 reviewers or more if I can. And thinking really strategically about who those people are, because often the editors do actually pay attention. I didn't used to realize that they do, but and I guess thinking about those people, not just who might be really, you know, experienced and at the top of their game in the field, but also a balance of who might actually have the time to review your paper and say yes to it. And that might be someone who's not quite as senior, who might, that still would give you a really good review. So I think that's particularly significant in the ELSI space, because a lot of editors looking at this type of work wouldn't really know who appropriate reviewers are, and the people that are in their database might be in the general sort of clinical area but not have the methods expertise.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. I'm just looking at our attendee numbers. We're scheduled to go until 12:30, but we've had a couple of people drop off. I just check in with the energy levels in our virtual room. How's everybody feeling? I feel like we've been trying to address some of the questions as they've come up in the chat. It's this, Radistina had another point which I thought was really interesting and powerful, which is that you sometimes feel like you have to have a really diverse academic knowledge to be flexible and have different perspectives here. And I think that's broadly true, but I don't want that to be a barrier to people who are new in the field, in the sense that this comes from diving in and being in collaborations and learning from others. And we don't all emerge from our PhDs as fully formed scholars with very, very broad interdisciplinary knowledge. So don't see that as a barrier, see it as something to be excited about going forward.
Yeah, can I just add on that point?
Sorry, Lisa, sure.
Sorry, just to add, because I think it's a really interesting point that you don't have to have the diverse academic backgrounds yourself, but if you're working in a certain context, it's really great to be able to pull all those diverse areas of knowledge and background experience together. So collaborating, I've done some of my favorite work with by collaborating with people who bring a totally different disciplinary expertise to me, and then we can sort of, you know, bounce off each other and so enrich each other's research and thinking on a particular topic that lies in this sort of ELSI field.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Thank you. So I think I'm going to ask each of you, I'm going to ask 2 more questions, I think. So one is, what is your ideal job? Besides one that has no end date, so, for people on soft money. What is your ideal job hopefully in this area, but or elsewhere, if you want to disclose that? Danya, I might ask you first. I've got an inkling you might be living it already, but if there's other things I don't know
I have it. No, I was about to say I have it. I think. I mean, I need to do some tweaking about how much I take on, as we've sort of already covered. But I'm very fortunate that I actually have a full research job, which is what I wanted. And yeah, I'm very happy in my role. I'm in a great team. I have a great co-team leader. And just on the point that Lisa was making, he comes from a different discipline to me. He's more philosophically trained. So we work really well together because I'm always coming at it from the practical, empirical side, and he comes at it from the philosophical side. So that means that any grants we write together is like a bit more rounded and we can draw on each other's experiences. So apart from the fact that I don't have a career forever in this role, because it's not a tenure track position, but hopefully I will keep being able to work there and keep getting funding. But yeah, I'm very lucky to have the job that I have, because I know that these jobs don't come up that often, to have like full research, and I'm not really into teaching. So yeah, so I'm very, very grateful that I have my job right now. But it's just sort of grown from that idea about following what I've been really passionate about and backing myself again in other ways.
Yeah. Thanks, Danya. Lisa and Erin, I'll come to you too in a sec, but just in case you both also say that you have your dream job right now, which you may well do, because I think you both have pretty awesome jobs actually, is this sense of, I think a key thing to take from this discussion is you can get involved in this type of work, whether it be research or policy or engagement, by starting small. You don't have to kind of just step into this 100% of your time, and one or two things can quickly snowball. And I know, Danya, you've always worked 100% research, but you weren't doing as much as what you're doing now. It angles out really, I guess, from being a little bit more focused to then becoming broader, and then you start supervising other people as you go through as well. So it's this sense of bringing in more cross-disciplinary folks into your work. So yeah, Lisa and Erin, without putting you on the spot or telling your employer, what is your ideal job in this area?
I have some thoughts on this. It's something I've given a lot of thought to. Right from when I was only partway through my PhD, what I've always wanted to do is to do philosophy, but in a way that makes it relevant and useful in the world. And it took me a long time to find an area where that was the case. I thought for a long time I might sort of develop philosophy programs and teach in high schools. And now I just badger my kids instead. But I think finding this sort of all the rich ethical issues that are thrown up by the application of medical genetics and genomics, I felt really fortunate to find this area and then to work in it. And now I really do like teaching as well. I really enjoy the balance between teaching and research, and that's a very good fit for me. So I would say that my current job is an example of my ideal job. It might not be necessarily the only one that fits my criteria, but it's certainly one where I'm happy to, where I feel like I'm doing what I want to be doing.
It's wonderful to hear. Erin.
Yeah, that's helpful, Lisa. I'm going to steal that and say what I'm doing now is one of my ideal jobs. A lot of what I do, I enjoy, and I guess another ideal job would be working 100% research, but that obviously comes with the instability of funding and various issues like that. So I guess somewhere I would, at one point in time, would have liked to have stayed was at the National Human Genome Research Institute, where I did my PhD, my postdoc in the US. And the staff who are employed there are not reliant on research funding. I found it was such an incredibly collaborative and inspiring place to do research. So if it wasn't so far away, and I'm not sure that I want to live back in the US particularly at the moment, but so there would be some disadvantages to being back there that would outweigh some of the things I have in my job at the moment. But that's another role that I would probably classify as my ideal job as well. And I still had elements of mentoring and teaching as part of that, but they weren't as big a focus as they are now.
That's great. Thanks, Erin. So yes, we just need to set up and fund an NIH for Australia. So yeah, it's, Steph's little boy is woken up, so we'll say bye to her. Okay, I've got a final question for each.
Can we?
Oh, sorry, Danya. Yeah, sure.
Can we just talk about funding for a second? Is that okay?
Yes,
because it is a real issue, and it's definitely something I have given a lot of thought to because I have chosen a research soft money career, and there have been times that I've really questioned that and thought maybe I should go into a teaching job because there's a lack of job security. But in the end, I think I have a higher tolerance for uncertainty than some people. And so I've just decided to go with it because it's more important to me that I'm doing something I feel really passionate about and I'm working with a good team than to have that job security. But I know for other people, they have chosen a different path because of that. So I just think funding is a real problem. And I think it's worth just highlighting that we don't often always get the grants that we want, and I'm constantly applying for new grants. It takes up a lot of my workload. So yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Like funding success rates, depending on the scheme, are as low as 7%, and even the better ones, kind of it's like 30, I think. So, the majority of people that apply for funding fail. So I think the only thing that could make it, well, obviously building better funding research in Australia, because there's a lot of fundable yet unfunded research. That's a political question. Having a body that can employ people in continuing research positions would be another way, or philanthropy, I guess. So that's another option. Meeting a rich benefactor at a party and convincing them of our worth would be amazing, but extremely unlikely, I think. And also I don't want to trivialize it because I know that this is really important and key, and having to spend a large proportion of your job time justifying your job and asking for it to continue is really difficult and not unique to the ELSI space, but I think the layer of interdisciplinarity on top kind of adds further complexity here for sure. Okay, thank you for highlighting that, Danya. Apologies that it hadn't come out enough, I think, in our discussion so far. What I want to ask now is, where do you see our area, whatever we choose to call it, going in the future? What do you think might happen next? And what we want to do is facilitate good science while being a critical friend, maybe, or while pointing out that it's not just the science that counts, it's some of the things alongside the science, like its ethical, legal, and social aspects. So where might this go? What if you're a newcomer to this area or thinking about trying to make a move into this area, what kinds of things might we want to look out for or highlight or celebrate?
I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question.
That's okay.
But one thing that I've just been thinking a bit about is how important it is to work together on all these issues, because I think we often, we've got lots of people who are doing very similar things in different spaces, and we don't find out that we're doing similar things in similar spaces until we get to conferences and hear other people's talks and things like that. So I'm just thinking that the importance of having networks like this kind of ELSI Genomics Network is really valuable, so we can showcase the work that people are doing. And I hate make work projects because I think they waste a lot of time, but I think it would be good if there was some kind of way that we could tap into some of other people's experiences. And I just saw a thing in the chat about mentoring. I think that's really, really important in this space as well. And I think even having like a space where you can look and go, oh, I need some expertise on this particular area. And you can go and look at a list and say, oh, well, there's experts who are willing to be contacted and have a quick chat about what they're doing. I think that kind of stuff is really helpful, because I think the more we work together, the more it's like we're standing on each other's shoulders to kind of get further along in the research. And I think working together, being collaborative, helping boost each other up rather than stepping on each other to get above is really valuable.
And they did it once for the whole thing, talked when I was muted. I just said absolutely. And I think something that, I mean, one of the things is we'd have to, I'd love to be able to, in the future, change funding models to allow, say, co-chief investigators as the leads, for example, because so much of this is driven by the funding environment and the limited size of particular projects and things like that. But I 100% think it's important to work together and to build on expertise and to try and avoid doing the same thing independently. I just want to check in, Danya. It might have just been my end, but you said I really don't like something or other projects, and I couldn't hear the word, so I just want to make sure I understood what you said.
I don't know what I said now.
Okay, well, that's all right.
I think
Lisa knows.
Yeah, it was make work projects, like
make work projects.
doing something for the sake of doing it.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
That's a good saying. Avoid make work projects. I think mentoring is definitely on our agenda for next year. The other thing I'd say is there is, in the US, it's quite North American focused, but when we release the recording of this discussion, I'll pop a link into it as well. There is a group run out of, I think it's a collaboration between Stanford and Columbia, called, what's it called, Lisa? ELSI something.
Oh, their conference is ELSICon. I just deleted their most recent email because...
Yes, I can't remember. It'll come back to me.
ELSI Hub. It's
ELSI Hub, that's it. I'll pop the link in the chat in a sec, or if you have it, Lisa, if you could pop it in the chat. But anyway, it's a really good resource because you can register yourself on their site. It's funded by NIH, so I'm not sure how long it will go for, but at the moment it is doing a lot of the things that I think we can piggyback on. There's no geographic boundary. They don't mind who you are. And you can just register with that, and then you can see other people globally. There's not many Australians there yet, but if you're interested, I highly recommend getting registered and being on that site. It's also just a really excellent clearinghouse for lots of different things. So yeah, that was, and then the other thing I will circulate with the recording is a paper that was written a few years ago. Danya, Erin, Lisa and I had a quick look at it with Kitty before starting this discussion today, but it was a paper written by Jessica Bell, who's a health lawyer from the UK, spent a bit of time in Melbourne, and it's about some of the challenges and opportunities of being an ELSI scholar. And so I think it's a quick read. It's worth having a read just to sort of know that these are not unique issues to just us or even Australia. Okay, where was I up to? Sorry, I think, Danya, you gave some points and I haven't heard from Erin or Lisa around this question of where do you see ELSI going? Lisa, I'm going to ask you first. Go.
Where's my mute? It's a hard question. I don't know if I feel qualified to answer that. I mean, there's two things maybe that I could say, and I'm probably not going to answer your question, but I think to a certain extent, the political environment will shape some of the ELSI questions that are at the top of the agenda and therefore have funds attached to them. So I think some of our work will be directed by where there's a political interest in addressing certain issues. But I think it's important also that we think about what is the research that we think is important from people who are working in the field, who are talking to clinicians and other practitioners on the ground. What are the really important ethical, legal and social issues that arise in this area, and find ways of pushing those projects forward to make them happen, I guess.
And Erin has just popped a link in the chat to another network which has strong ties with the ELSI community, if not an ELSI network itself too. And they have some really great seminars recorded and available to watch. I did one in July, I think it was. Yeah, so it's a really nice network full of good people. Erin, did you have any where's this all going comments?
Yeah, I guess I don't have a definitive answer either, but I am hopeful that there will be a lot of opportunities, and we probably don't know what they are at this point. And just reflecting on where the space and the sort of general field was when I started my PhD, it was a time before Australian genomics, before Melbourne genomics, and Danya and Ainsley probably remember this as well. And I think it was a very different place to be working in this area than it is now. I sometimes still find that I have to fight a bit for recognition of what we do, but I had to do that a lot more back when I was starting. So I think to be an early career or a PhD student in this space now is a lot more supportive and encouraging than when we started out. And I think hopefully that just is going to get stronger and grow more in the future. So
thank you. I agree. Okay. Does anyone, whether a panelist or an attendee, want to ask any final questions or make any final comments? And you can do that by raising your hand, or you can do it in the chat. Well, we're just waiting to see if anything pops up in the chat. I'm just going to take a minute. Oh, Radistina's got a question. Okay, two actually have come in. One by Chaya. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Radistina just says, you know, the ELSI space is inherently diverse, which I think we'd all agree with. Do you see it moving more towards co-design? Would anyone like to have a go at this question?
I'm not sure I'm going to again answer that exactly, but that reminds me of something I wanted to bring up, which is this appreciation of co-design research that's really happened in the last few years, and I guess especially from NH and MRC pushing more community engagement and that side of things, which I think as ELSI scholars, or however we define ourselves, we can contribute so much to that area. And I think that's a bit of that case of sort of responding to the external environment and how we can market ourselves as, you know, bringing in our expertise in the social science or the ethics or whatever it might be, and how we can sort of tailor that to speak to the co-design and the community engagement space. So that sort of reminded me of that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Erin. Danya.
Just on that, I think that there is a problem with the way that funding works these days. I'm back to funding, sorry, about the fact that there's a lot of value put into the community engagement and trying to get people. And I think it's really, really valuable to get people from communities that you're going to be researching, whether that's Indigenous communities or disease-based communities, etc. Get them in early, talk to them about what they need, and then design the project. The problem is that you don't have the money to do that early engagement before you get, because you're doing that in order to get the funding. So I think what we need to see is some maybe some seed funding based initiatives that are coming out and making them more standard in order to try and promote that, because otherwise you're designing a project before you've done the engagement, and then you might have to rejig the whole project. So yeah, I think that's a real problem.
Totally agree. Okay. Lisa, are you good on this question, or would you like to add anything? Yep, you're good. Okay, cool. So Chaya has asked whether we feel disheartened by the pace of research.
Can I just ask, I think it's higher. I think what is it, which aspect do you feel is slow? Because I think there's lots of different aspects that you might feel are slow, but is there one particular aspect that you find frustrating?
Oh, that's so interesting, because I interpreted the question to mean I'm disheartened because it's going so fast. So yeah, that's why
I'm questioning it, because it feels very fast to me, but that's because I have a lot going on. But I don't think that's where it was coming from.
No, okay.
Is Kaya still with us?
I'm here with you. And Danya, very impressive pronunciation of my name, but yeah, I'm not fussy. So yeah, no, I mean, I'm not fully in the research world. I guess I'm just very recently starting out. So to me, I was asking the pace from research findings to being integrated into practice. That's kind of where the question was coming from. It could be because, yeah, from my perspective, the genetic sort of research field does get integrated fairly quickly these days, but does it, firstly? And so, yeah, I guess it sounds like you don't feel too disheartened then.
No, I think now that I understand what you're saying, it is a bit disheartening, because I think the thing that I feel I do that I hope will make the most difference is when I help influence policy, but then it takes a while for policy to get approved, and then it takes even longer for it to be implemented. And I don't know a way to make that happen, because I guess if you're influencing things like guidelines, then guidelines take a while for people to register that they exist, let alone implement their practice. And I'm talking from a place where I do a lot of work around reporting of results and things like that. And it is very slow. But I don't have an answer as to how to make that more quick. But yeah, I think it is frustrating.
I think for me, my question was more as someone that started out in a research role and sort of wondering, do I want to stay here or do I want to, I'm a genetic counselor by training. So I guess I was, I want to feel fulfilled in my work. And if the pace isn't as quick as we would like, does that impact how fulfilled you feel at work?
Should I just continue on that? I do feel fulfilled. I'm also someone who did genetic counselling training and then obviously decided to go into research. So I was worried that I wouldn't feel like I was making as big a difference as I wanted to. But I think you can make a difference in other ways as well. So I think giving presentations at different forums. So doing things that are more community-based or that are going to have a wider reach than just academic publications can be really fulfilling. But I also feel like I mentor people, whether that's officially or unofficially. It's often unofficial. But I feel like that's something I find really rewarding, because it's really nice seeing junior researchers develop and grow, and I like nurturing them in their career decisions, etc. So that's probably where I get more of my fulfillment as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds like we have a topic to discuss next year as well, for sure. Thank you for your question. Okay, we're nearly at time, so I'll just take one final minute just to say a huge thank you to our three panelists for today. I think you've been incredibly wise, forthright, insightful. So it's just really fantastic to hear your views and insights about what it is like to work in a field like ours. And I hope that you enjoyed it as well and got to say the things you wanted to say. And thank you to everyone for coming and listening as well. So I will end things here, but we'll say have a happy, safe and relaxing festive season. And we'll see you back for more events and hopefully some background initiatives, such as maybe mentoring, in 2023. Thank you.